everyone. Welcome to Qobuz Live. We're happy to have you, and we've got a really fun show today. We've got Bill Schnee, master recording engineer. In fact, he's known as the engineer of engineers. So we'll be bringing Bill on in just a few minutes. And I'll introduce him a little more properly at that point. But first, well, I'll tell you just a little bit about Qobuz. First off, we've got now 70 million tracks. Neither, I think I need to go on the side. Thanks very much. We've got 70 million tracks up to 24 192-bit perfect. They're in FLAC, and these files that are provided are unaltered in any way. We never touch the file outside of just ingesting what we get from the labels, and we always order the highest res that the labels have got. We've also got well, I'll give you a couple of the price points that we're dealing with. So for about $12.50 a month, if you pay annually, you've got access to everything Qobuz. We've also got a couple of other tiers, like for $20, $21 almost per month. You can be in the Sublime Studio membership, which gives you incredible deals on high resolution audio. I mentioned this one last week. I should have had a Bill Schnee recording up here, but this time this was the Neil Young recording that we showed last week for $20. If you're just a human being and you go to Qobuz.com, you can buy the full 24 192 album at $20. But if you are that Sublime member, you can actually buy those for about $11, which is an incredible deal. So if you are a downloader, if you like to support your artists, go buy some of their music. It's the best way to get them paid. And it's a really good way for you to build up your collection. So you could get that for like I say, for $10.99. We've also got a lot of other cool things in Qobuz. One being our editorial. We have handwritten editorial. People are writing for us every single day, mainly on staff. So if you want to know a lot more about your musicians, other than just this is what they sound like on the record, this is a super place to start, and just gives you all kinds of insight. So that's a little bit about Qobuz. So really what I want to do now is I want to bring in my friend Bill Schnee after a quick introduction. We're really, really happy to have him here today. And we're going to be talking a good bit about his book, Chairman at the Board. Chairman at the Board. I thought, what a great title for a book. In fact, when Bill was on last time, we were all waiting on this book. We knew that it had, I think, nearly a year delay before it ever got published. But it's just now on Amazon. I've just finished reading it, and I got to tell you, it is a total page turner. Not from a suspense level, but the whole thing is just incredibly interesting. Most people will never know the impact that Bill has had on some of the best vintage and current sound quality that there is. He's a real master and an innovator when it comes to that. He was never just satisfied with the regular stuff that they gave him to mix on. It always had to be up to his standards, or he always wanted it to be up to his standards, and finally ended up building and opening up Bill Schnee's studio in 1982, which then produced some of the best sounding albums that were out. Everybody loved these albums, and Bill's got over, I think, 500. So it's a pretty big discography. Look him up on Wikipedia. And you'll just be absolutely amazed at the number of albums this guy has worked with. A lot of albums that Bill worked on, I didn't learn until the book, but they wouldn't have even been made if it weren't for Bill's advocacy. One that we talked about the last show was Thelma Houston's Pressure Cooker. I had no idea that Bill had to go to bat so hard for this album. That was that was incredible. He had many, many meetings, and the album almost didn't get made. So he was really, really a tenacious guy about things that he thinks is going to, um, really work well. His whole journey, as you'll see in the book, was one of love and determination to produce and mix some of the best albums possible. But even before that, just getting into this industry was not. It's not like you just get magically picked and then okay, all of a sudden you're a recording engineer and producer. That's just not the way it works. Bill had to go through so much just to even get his first gig, and then within the gig to get his first, mixing gig, and then finally his production started going well, and he started doing more and more of that. Bill is a musician first. We've talked about this a good bit, and I'd like Bill to talk about it when he gets on camera. But in my opinion, the very best recording engineers and the very best producers are musicians. There's just something that they know, something that they feel intuitively that people that aren't musicians just can't know. That's not to say there's not a lot of great engineers and even possibly producers that aren't, but to me, I think this is an attribute that would be well needed doing what Bill's done. He's multiple Grammy, Emmy, and has Dove Awards. He's a producer, audio engineer. He's got over 125 gold and platinum records. As I said before, he's known in the industry as the engineers, and worked on dozens and dozens of Grammy-winning and nominated albums. He's personally been nominated 11 times for the best engineered Grammy and the best engineered Grammy category. And he currently resides in Nashville with his wife, Sally. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Bill Schnee to our program. Bill, it's great to have you back again. Oh, and you're muted.
Great. And thank you. And it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. Bill and I've been in touch over the last. Well, actually, we never lost touch after the first live stream that we did, and I told Bill that I would love to have you back when the book is available so that we could talk about that a little bit. And Bill graciously accepted. I asked him if he likes to do these things, and well, what did you tell me, Bill?
I'm sorry, what?
I asked you just a little while ago, do you like doing these things, or are they like just a promotional thing for you?
Interesting. I've perhaps to a fault, I've never been into self-promotion my whole life, my whole career. And what the publisher said, well, you're into it now. And so I started doing it, and I didn't know what to think, but I got off the bat right from the get. I liked it. So I'm having fun now.
Well, good. Thanks a lot for joining us. Like I say, Bill's new book is Chairman at the Board. You get that on Amazon. We're actually going to be giving away a couple of signed copies today on the show, and I cannot tell you how highly I recommend this book. So if you don't happen to be one of the couple lucky folks that win Bill's book, go on to Amazon and get this thing. It's so fascinating. The whole time, I could have finished this book in probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 hours, because it is just an interesting book. And if you just read it straight through, you're just going to be fascinated the whole time. My problem was it took me a lot longer than that to read, because every time you would mention an artist or an album, I would go and listen to the artist or album, and I tried to pick up as much about what you were saying about those folks as possible. So it took me like a lot longer to get through this than I thought it was going to. I was thinking, okay, I'll read this, then I'll just get through it. I'll put some questions down, and we'll do the live stream. But it was so interesting, I couldn't continue to go without stopping every 10 minutes.
Yeah, there's over a third of the book was cut out in editing, And someone gave me the great idea, which I have done, which is to take that which we cut out and put it on my website. So in the book, when you're reading the book, you'll come to a place where it tells you, here's the magic phrase, go to billschnee.com, put it in, and you'll get to read the rest of what's there. And when I did that, I put YouTubes of the songs as I was going along. I could do that, on the website. And so there's, several of those in there as I talk about songs that I've done and whatnot. And then I called the publisher and I said, whoa, what a great idea. What if at the beginning of the book, you send them to billschnee.com and there's another tab called, while you're reading. And they checked with legal and the attorney said, so we couldn't do that.
But there is parts of the book that were cut out that you do have on the site that people can get to. I'm really looking forward to going to that.
The deleted scenes, as it were.
Yeah. The deleted scenes. I didn't have time to do that. I really wish I just told Bill a little while ago, I should have almost put this off another week so I could have not just, read the book and had some questions, but really digested it hard. Bill, you'll just have to come back on again. At some point we'll get you back on again. But as I said, Bill started out as a musician. You started out playing keyboards, right?
Right.
And what was the keyboard you played?
Organ.
And what was it?
What organ?
Yeah.
It was a Hammond M3. Oh, you want that story?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
My parents moved to Southern California my senior year of high school, and I met some guys that were starting a band, and I said, do you think an organ would fit in? They said, well, let's try it. So they came over to my house and we did it. An M3 is a small Hammond, still has drawbars, but it doesn't need a separate cabinet like the bigger Hammonds that you're used to seeing, B3 and C3. And the band seemed like it was going to work, but then we were going to go do gigs, and what now? So, some people would get a B3, should have got to get a B3, but you need a trailer or a van at least. And so instead, I convinced my parents to let me cut the bottom of my mom's organ off, which had the speaker and amplifier, and then I took an output from it, and we could plug it into a guitar amp, and that's how the LA Teens did their live shows.
That's fantastic. Necessity is the mother of invention. You just do what you have to do. And part of the book talks about the early band and the near success. I mean, a lot of us have got these ideas. In fact, I'm in this industry because I was just going to get a job at a hi-fi shop before my band got signed, right? It was just about to happen. So in the book, Bill talks about some of the learning experiences, and then some of the heartbreaks that you have, straight out when you're young and you really think you're going to make it in the industry and you're going to be a big star. But that was also a really interesting part of the book. But the other thing is just how many people that you've worked with, and just how humble you are about the whole thing. You worked with some of the absolute greats as we know them. One of the stories that you were talking about was about Barbra Streisand, and you weren't very old when you got a chance to actually record one of the greatest voices on planet Earth at that point, right?
Yeah, I think I was 23.
And how did that come about?
Well, when I started engineering, I worked with several producers and whatnot. My dad was a Jewish doctor, and David knows what that means. You have to you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. A lot of pressure I had, and I wasn't into being a doctor at all like he was. But I started in the studios, in the first studio, and went on started law school to shut him up. And I got through the first semester, and it just wasn't working. I didn't have, I got all C's and a B when I started the second semester, and it just wasn't working because I didn't have time to really do the reading properly between the sessions I was doing and the classes. So I had quit, previously I'd quit college for 2.5 years chasing the band. So I figured now I'll chase music for the last time, give it 1.5 years, and nothing happens, I'm back in school. Get the law degree and see how I feel if I want to try it again. So a year went by, and it was getting close to enrolling for the fall semester. And one of the clients that I had got a deal with Clive Davis, who at CBS, and he told Clive about me, and Clive called me up and said, you know, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I think I'm going back to law school. And he said, no, you don't want to go to law school. I went to law school. If you've got music in your blood, you know that's what you want to do, and that's what you'll be doing. And I said, well, I'd love to, but, and essentially he took the buts away. And so as to Streisand, she obviously is an artist on that label, and he gave me a shot at producing, and I got very lucky and had a small top 30 hit right out of the box. But they had a strangest thing at Columbia Studios, in Hollywood at least. There was only one assistant engineer. And of course, they had 3 studios and mastering rooms and everything. And how do you do that with one assistant engineer? Well, if you weren't mixing or recording, you became an assistant. So it was a crazy thing and kind of demoralizing for like some of the guys that had been there a while. You know, one week you'd be recording a huge artist, and the next week you'd be assisting running the tape machine on a demo. And basically that's what happened. They put me in on Barbra Streisand as a second. And about after the first week, the producer, Richard Perry, said, I want you to engineer. And that's how it started.
That's incredible. And then there's some other stories about Barbara in the book as well, because she's actually known as someone that can be fairly difficult to work with, but you know,
and yet, as I said in the book, I'm the only person I've ever met that has never had a problem with her. I don't know why. I don't know why. Luck, I don't know. But I've worked with her over the years several times, and never had problem one with her. You know, she's demanding, but you know, and I think I said it in the book. You know, sometimes what you have to do, I learned this early on. If an artist starts, you know, climbing a tree and getting out on a branch, that they're going to fall, it's going to break, and they're going to go down. You know, I have no problem telling him you shouldn't do that, and even, you know, and why not, and then tell them why not. And I think, you know, they'll respect you if you show that you have their best interests in mind.
Totally agree. Totally agree with that.
I will say this: you have to be at the top of your game with her, because she is extremely intelligent, and she has a memory like nobody I've ever met. She'll tell you, you know, I know I did that vocal 2 weeks ago when I sang this note, and that kind of thing. She's amazing in many ways. I think she's an incredible director too. I wish she had done more movies.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, you worked with her on some film stuff too, right?
Well, yeah, I mixed a half of Yentl.
Yeah,
the soundtrack for Yentl.
yeah. If you guys look at Bill's discography, you'll just be amazed. I mean, you would think, you know, okay, here. Oh, that's it. Oh, no, there's another page. Oh, no, there's another page. It's amazing about how many of these projects that you have worked on. But one of the things I found super interesting, Bill, was that a lot of the albums that you worked on, two in particular that I'll bring up, that would have never even been made if it weren't for your advocacy of these albums, which I found just fascinating. Especially as many times as you had to go back and as many people as you had to convince that, hey, this is going to be a great album. And you've actually got, you know, some successes under your belt. I would think, well, you know, let's let this guy just go ahead and do this. But like early on let's start with the Thelma Houston pressure cooker, which is just an incredibly dynamic album. In fact, when that came out, I can't think of a more dynamic album that was out, especially in the pop era. But that album almost didn't get made. That was kind of your idea, right?
Yeah. Well, Doug Sachs and Lincoln Mayorga owned the Mastering Lab, which was a mastering studio, and there was a recording studio right behind them. And they decided to do an album direct to disc, which is, if for those that don't know, where you record one whole side of the album from song 1 to song 2 to song 3. You can't stop the lathe that makes the master that you make LPs from. So they decided to do a record that way because they knew that doing it, direct to disc, eliminates 2 generations of analog tape, because you're going right, instead of going to a multi-track analog machine and then overdubbing on it and whatnot, and then mixing it to another analog machine, and then taking that to mastering, you just go right to the lathe straight away. So it's the sound of the control room is what you get on the lathe on the disc.
And there's a guy controlling the lathe at the same time, right?
Yeah, which is a real battle to fight, because typically when you master from tape, there's a playhead, a prehead that's ahead of the playhead where the music is coming out of, and that head just sends the music into the computer that tells the computer how to open or close the grooves, because as low end and loud things and whatnot, well, you'll want to expand the grooves so that they don't hit each other and you have a skipping record. So when you're doing a direct-to-disc record, that lathe operator in the rehearsals has to take copious notes and learn where he thinks that kind of thing is going to happen, and then he finds out on the first run through. Anyway, they did one in '69 just to show off their mastering, figuring that people would hear that and be excited by the sound, and not really realizing that they were cheating in the sense that it was direct to disc. And they enjoyed doing it so much, they did another one 2 years later in '71, and then they did a third one in '73, and that one they asked me to engineer. And
which one was that, by the way?
That was Lincoln Mayorga and Distinguished Colleagues, Volume 3.
I listened to that last night.
And those albums were basically Lincoln's arrangements. Lincoln's a very talented keyboard player and arranger, and they're basically his arrangements of other people's songs and some of his compositions, I guess. But after that, the first thing that happens is you go in to do this session like this, and in 3 days, the album has been recorded, mixed, and mastered. There's nothing like that compared to the typical, timeline of an album. And so that was the most fun I'd ever had. And going back to regular recording was like,
you have to be thinking on your toes the whole time, right?
What's that?
You got to be thinking on your toes the whole time. There's no relaxing, or we'll fix that in the mix, or we'll get an overdub on it. It's everything.
The biggest thing that people don't realize until I explain it to them is when you mix a song from, whether it's from tape or from a computer, which is what we do almost entirely these days, that vocal will come back the exact same phrasing, the exact same tone, the exact same everything every time you do it. The guitar is playing those same notes, nothing changes. When you're doing something like this, these are human beings that are playing with and off each other. And even when you go through a whole pass, which is a whole side of an album, and take a break and you come back to do another take of the whole album, it's going to be close, but it's not identical. She's not going to sing the exact same notes and the exact same amount of energy. So yeah, you're mixing constantly, trying to adjust, and so it certainly isn't perfect, but and then the hardest part is picking the right take, which is the take of a whole side, because you can have 4 songs that are just okay, really good, let's say, but that fifth one is just we didn't get it together. It's a horrible mix. You have to take the whole side as it comes at you. Which a funny story about that was on the second side of that album, the last song was "Got to Get You Into My Life," the Beatles song, and it was going along, song 1, song 2, song 3. I think there were 4 songs on that side, and we got to get to my life, and everything's going great. Came to the first chorus, everything is good. I mean, I'm feeling great about the mix, the performance is great, everything's smoking. Comes to the second verse, and there's no Thelma. I grab the fader and shove it up, and all I hear is, "I'm sorry." She had locked up and couldn't remember the opening line of the second verse. And what else could I do but hit the talk back and say, "That's okay, sweetie, we'll get it this time. You sounded great. Let's just do it again. It'll be fine." Start the side all over again. So that was the proverbial one that got away.
So everybody is under huge pressure because everybody knows this is a one take thing. I mean, and so the horns, all the musicians, they're all under that same pressure. That really weighs on a musician, and I'm sure an engineer as well.
Well, here's the deal. I didn't finish, so I did that third one. So then I went to the Lincoln Mayorga third one, and I went to Doug and said, "I want to produce one of these records with a vocalist," and it took him about 2 weeks to begin to consider it, which he finally did, but it took 2 months to convince Lincoln. But once they were finally convinced, the whole story in the book, but the behind the scenes version is the complete version, by the way, for those people that are interested in Sheffield. It's abridged in the book. But yeah, so, and at that time, 1974, I was putting it together. I'd only worked with 2 singers that I knew could do it. And the first one was Barbara. And I had, at that point, done 3 records with her. And I called her manager and said, I'm wanting to do an album on this independent label where we do it all direct to disc, a whole side lot. Excuse me, kid, you're bothering me. You get to the point. Well, I was wondering, and it literally was the Hollywood. I don't know if he was chomping a cigar, but it was, "Go away, kid. I'm busy." So the only other one was a new artist on Motown that I had just worked with, Thelma Houston, and I knew she had an amazing gift, a gorgeous sounding voice, and incredible control, and so that's how it came about. But it was definitely 2 months of work and some problems as it went through too, getting it finished. But I do want to say that I put together the best band you could have had in Los Angeles at that time. I had the 2 best guitar players in LA, the 2 best drummers, 2 best percussionists, 3 of the best keyboard players that ever lived. I mean, in pop music, it's just an incredible band, and 6 horn players, and 6 background singers, and but everybody was at the absolute top of their game. So it was great, and the energy was great. I remember reading once, not about Thelma's album, but about some guy that yakking about direct-to-disc. He said, "Yeah, the problem with direct-to-disc is they're all nervous, and so it comes across that they're not relaxed." And all I can say is either he never heard Thelma's album, or he wouldn't know a good performance if it bit him on the nose. So.
Right, because it certainly didn't sound like anyone was nervous at the end of the day. It was just it was quite if you haven't heard that album, you should look it up on Qobuz. It's Thelma Houston Pressure Cooker, and it was a super popular album in the 80s, to even just show off dynamic range, to show what could be done with an album. Because if you remember, folks, back in those days, this kind of recording was the exception. It was not the rule. There weren't that many great recordings, not of this kind of music, right? You could find a few more on classical and some on jazz, but when it came to that, funk, rock and roll, pop, it was hardly ever did you get a good recording. And so the ones that you did find, they all turned into be a super special album. I've heard that album no less than 500 times. And it's an incredible album. But one of the things I found really interesting, and I had no idea, Bill, that when you had an idea for an album, you didn't just say, "Hey, I'd like to do this," and then all of a sudden, magically, all the musicians show up at your studio the next day or the next week. You actually had to hire the right musicians for almost everything that you wanted to do. So if you wanted this Thelma Houston album to come out right, you actually picked out the drummers, picked out the horn section, picked out all the musicians, and really you were like herding cats a lot of your career doing stuff like this, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the job of a producer, and all that's what you do. Producers are hired to take an artist and come up with an album, and so that's just a part of what you do.
Yeah, that was really cool. And then the same thing happened with another, crazy album in around the same time, which was James Newton Howard and Friends, which featured some of your good friends and some of my absolute lifetime heroes, especially Jeff Porcaro. He remains one of my favorite drummers that have ever lived. We lost him way, way too fast, and didn't realize that you had not only recorded Jeff quite a few times, but you guys were actually really good friends.
Yeah, very, very close friends. And that James Newton Howard album was basically the two keyboard players and drummer from Toto, and then James Newton Howard. So it was three keyboards, and the three of them were Yamaha endorsees for their keyboards. And a part of their deal was they had to play at the NAMM show, with the National Association of Musical Manufacturers had a big show every January in Los Angeles. And they had to play. So they had written all these instrumentals that they played all on keyboards. And so I happened to stop at Jeff's house one day, and they were in rehearsing. And when they took a break, I said, what is this? And they said, oh, this is stuff we came up with for the NAMM show next month. And I went, oh, and I knew right away, boy, there's a direct-to-disc record. And so, that I had to push for that and make it work. And I told Doug Sachs, I said, the hardest part of this album will be getting them in the studio, because James at that time was playing keyboards for Elton John, and Toto was already Toto. And so the schedules would not coincide. And as it turned out, I finally, halfway through the following year, I realized that I went to them and I said, the time to do it is at the end of the year, when you guys are going to rehearse again for the next NAMM show. And so that's what we did, and worked out great. That was the toughest thing. That was the toughest thing I've ever done in a studio, because if you can imagine, normally if with on the console, the recording console, there'll be different faders for the bass drum, for the snare, guitar, bass, whatever. This was the drums, kick, snare, overheads, whatever, and then James, synth 1, James, synth 2, David Paich, synth 1, synth 2, Steve Porcaro, synth 1, synth 2. I had to memorize what synth was being played on every song. And as if that wasn't, because they don't sound like you don't recognize it as, oh, that's a guitar. Where's a guitar? They're all synth sounds. And I had to figure that out. And as if that wasn't hard enough, then on a couple of songs, David Paich is playing some sound, and then in the solo, oh no, he's playing synth bass. And then in the solo, he's going to do the solo, and Steve is going to take over synth bass. So Steve is panned off to one side with some reverb on him. And fortunately, David's in the center and stayed in the center for the solo. I just had to so I had to get Steve's to the center, put the reverb off, and turn the reverb on his, and then when the solo, put it back. That kind of, I'm convinced, I'm very fortunate that I'm in really good shape, this old man. And I know I could do a direct-to-disc record again today without any problem. What I don't know for sure is if I could handle that memory, what it would take to do that album again. And funny enough, the first playback, David Paich came in the studio and he just went, oh, that's the roughest thing I've ever done. And I walked him over to the console and I just pointed at, all the labeling, synth 1, synth 2. And he looked at it and he went, oh. He knew right away.
If you haven't heard this album, folks, it's called James Newton Howard and Friends. And you would have never known that you guys did this in like one take. It is absolutely perfect. Everything about this album, to me, you may have heard other takes and you may have, you were there, right? But to me, this album from start to finish is a total masterpiece. You've got the Porcaros in there, for goodness sake. And then Dad joins in.
Yeah, we put Joe Porcaro in on percussion to add some more hi-fi to it.
So here's the thing about this album. You can it's recorded in such a way. First off, it sounds good at any volume level, but to me, when you just crank this thing, it's absolutely amazing, and it's mixed in such a way that you can do just that. I mean, you can just absolutely blast this album, and it's so clean. It doesn't ever sound like it's getting out of hand. Everything is totally controlled, but
Yeah, you know, one of the things about it is that is, of course, what you mentioned earlier is dynamic range, and there was no. I mean, I might have had. I don't remember if there was any. If I had any compressors on anything. I know there was no overall compression, whatnot. So it's completely, you know, the real dynamics of what was played, and not being robbed. Like, as I point out, if you're recording on tape, especially back then, you were, you know, you'd get robbed of dynamics because tape doesn't, you know, didn't have the highest range of that. So you really get the impact, see what dynamics can do, and that which is pretty much a lost art today, especially because everything now, even the recordings, we've been forced to compress more and more and more. But one of Doug's favorite things before he passed away about 6 years ago, he would, if he had a young band come in the studio and they're mastering, he'd take the LP out and put it on and play one of the cuts off of there just to watch their faces, put them in front of the speakers just to watch their jaws drop.
From the first tune. And it's like every single tune is cooking. It sounds a little like the 80s because of the synths that were used.
Yeah,
but
that was the thing. It was the GS1, which was the forerunner of the DX7, which was the sound of the 80s.
right.
So it definitely got that dated sound. We were there first.
Hey, at least it
definitely got the dated sound, but it's still to me an amazing sounding disc.
At least there were no Simmons drums on there, right? That's the one thing that you cannot go back and make a Simmons drum, you know, recording sound anywhere like it belongs anywhere except, you know, in that small time period. Thank God. I hated those things. And there's a question here that I find super interesting, and I'm going to take this, Bill, but you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? CD quality only on Qobuz. That's absolutely right. But you take a listen to this thing and tell me it doesn't sound like it's high resolution. There were a few recording engineers in those days that could actually have a 16-bit recording, and it sounds phenomenal. Bill was certainly one of those guys. Another friend of mine, Cookie Marenko, she's got some 1644 stuff out that you would swear, if you were listening to it blind, that's a high res disc. I think the same thing about this particular recording. Yes, we've only got it in 1644, and I'd love to have it in high res, but it's an absolute masterpiece in 1644. You're not going to be disappointed in it. Would it be better if we could redo it in high resolution, Bill?
Yeah, well, I guess you have to get the only way now would be to get get a good pressing and take it off the pressing.
Yeah, I guess that would be it.
We always did backup tapes for it, 15 IPS tapes, but even that loses a tremendous amount over what went to disc.
Sure. Well, I can tell you, if you take a listen to this one or any of Bill's stuff at 1644, you'll find the same. I believe we've only got Asia in 1644, and again, the Steely Dan's Asia, and again, this album sounds like it's supposed to sound. It just sounds right because of the way it was mixed and handled and produced to begin with. So I have kept you on here probably 10 minutes longer than I wanted to before I take a little break, but you're going to still be in the hot seat. We're going to bring Dan Matka on, and Dan's going to talk about a few albums that you put out, and maybe you can just add a little bit of commentary while he's showing these things. Dan, okay. How are you doing? Oop. I brought you in. Neitha was bringing you in, so.
You know, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. I'm fine here. I'm fine. Thank you for asking me to do this.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. I'm going to let you guys play for just a little while, and I will talk to you in just a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, we had picked just a couple of albums from your discography that we have on Qobuz and in high res that they've been, mastered in high resolution, and that are pretty, key discography items, we thought. So figured we would highlight them for everyone who's tuned in. And if you have a comment or a thought about each one, you can chime in. But there's no science behind picking them. They just seemed like incredible albums worth highlighting for our viewers and listeners. And I don't remember what order I put them in. Do we have? We've got graphics. Incredible. So we've got obviously the whole Steely Dan catalog, Gaucho in 2496 resolution, and I think audiophiles as a group know Steely Dan and know the recordings, but for some younger audiences, they might not be as familiar with this stuff, which is just recorded. It's almost like magic when you listen to this.
Both this and Asia, which are just highlights on a musical level for what was going on, what was happening in the studio.
Yeah. I mean, musicianship of the highest caliber meets songwriting and quality, and these still sound so good today. Anyhow, what's next on the hit parade? We've got this one, and I just saw a documentary that talked all about this and showed some of her earliest performances. Whitney on Merv Griffin, I guess, where she broke, early performances where she broke nationally. And so you worked on this, which was her first album, and
yeah. I was mixing an album with Teddy Pendergrass, the fabulous R&B singer, and we're finishing up a song, and the producer said, "There's a duet on this album. I'm going to go record the girl right now. I'll be back." And he came back, several hours later, and I said, "How was it?" He said, "Oh my gosh, this girl sings like you've never heard. She's drop dead gorgeous, and she sings like a bird." And that was the young lady on this album cover, and so that duet was on Teddy's album, and it's also on Whitney's first album.
Yeah. I mean, it's a key album of the 80s, and any discography should definitely include it. And on Qobuz, we've got it in 2496. Then I also picked this one because I'm a huge music nerd and a big Jimmy Webb fan, and people probably know him as a songwriter for sure, with tons of massive international hits in the 60s. But as an artist, I'm personally a fan, and he was idiosyncratic and definitely unusual. But this is a classic album that we have in 24-bit, 88.2 kilohertz sampling rate, which means that they did it right and they didn't try to upsample it beyond where it should go. So it's a great sounding record that I'm sure most of our listeners are probably not that familiar with.
Yeah, it's a very, very good album. And all I did was mix this album. What year was this? Like 79 or something?
Yep.
Something like that. Interestingly, when right before Clive gave me my big break that I spoke about earlier, I had somehow been introduced to Jimmy, and he had a home studio in Encino where he lived, and I was helping him in his studio. I was just getting started when the deal came up for me to go to CBS, and I had to quit. And I saw Jimmy about a year ago. I hadn't seen him. I don't know if it's since probably late 80s, but I saw him about a year ago. And I told him, "Do you remember that?" And he didn't remember that was me back then. Yeah. And I said, "Well, I do remember it, especially his car, because he had a real Cobra with the 427 and 2 quads, which I'm a car guy, and that spoke to me then and still speaks to me. But
Right.
great guy, phenomenal talent. Yeah.
So people should check that album out if they're not familiar with it. And I think I may have picked one more. This, because, obviously jazz is huge on Qobuz. Our number 2 genre overall is jazz, which is pretty incredible. Of course, jazz is a huge genre that encompasses so many different things. But I saw that you worked on this one and some of the other Miles albums of this era, and it was definitely an interesting time, these late period Miles albums. Did you have any thoughts or anecdotes on this?
Well, just that, obviously this was I guess by anybody's standards, this was a left turn for Miles. And in that it was done very modern, as in, sampled sounds, drums, and that kind of thing. Pioneered in great part by the incredible Marcus Miller, bass player Marcus Miller, who I had become friendly with from jazz projects I did with Tommy LaPuma in New York. And I think it's great. The reviews on this at the time went 2 directions. Some people thought it was absolutely incredible. It's second only to Sketches and this and that. And other people said, out of his mind, hang it up. Why would you do something like this?
Right.
And,
well, he didn't hang it up, and he was certainly no stranger to making left turns and doing what he wanted to do and shaking things up. But it just, to me, was really interesting. And your discography is really so eclectic, and the connective thread is incredible musicians and people who are, the best at what they do. And, and we think you are too. So thank you so much for doing the show.
Sure. My pleasure.
Dan, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming around, buddy. I know you've got a lot going on, and we always appreciate when you can make time to come on.
Oh yeah, no, it's my pleasure, because me, I'm the one of the nerds who reads the liner notes and loves to know who works on the recordings, and that's the beautiful thing about Qobuz, that we have that information, and also with high quality streaming, that you can just listen to stuff and discover stuff. And what do we say? It's like drinking from a fire hose. It's like too much. So just getting your discography, Bill, like David reading the book, it's like, well, there goes the weekend. It's just such a pleasure to hear the stories behind the recordings. I love that. There was one question that I was going to bring up, because I'm curious too, because again, I'm a guy who pays attention to who worked on the recordings, and this guy made some interesting records of his own. But Roger Nichols, you worked with him in the back in the day, or?
Roger had done some recordings and whatnot. I don't know why exactly they hired me to do the tracking on Asia, and then Roger did overdubs. And then on Gaucho, he did a lot more recording. And of course, on that album, that's the album where, in their search for the perfect drum sound, they ended up commissioning him to build a computer, one of the first for playing drums with sampled sounds, real sounds put into a computer and then programmed to play beats.
Right. Well, imagine when that was a novel idea. Now people probably can't imagine a time when that wasn't something any 3-year-old with a phone could do at an amazing level, right?
Right.
David, we're going to replace you with a kid with an iPhone. I'm sorry.
Hey, listen, I've been replaced many times by worse. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I'll be watching the rest of the show.
Take care, buddy.
Bye-bye.
So, hey, I would say welcome back, but you never left. I usually give people a break at that point, but this was such an opportunity to get you to be able to at least comment on some of the things and some of the albums. We could do a whole show like that. That would just be a total blast. But, Next time, let's do that next time. But I've got a couple more questions for you. We've got 3 or 4 stories that I definitely want you to get into. But there was one that really struck me as I don't know. It just struck me. But you'd gotten hired at Columbia in New York, which that must have been just a huge, that had to be huge for you. You had to be probably pretty excited about that at that time, right?
Sure, of course.
And then the story goes, I know you don't know which one I'm gonna go for, but the one that I'm gonna go for is reproduction and how you found the studio, and that one of the comments that you made was so I walk in there and they've got like Altec Lansing Voice of the Theaters, which you would not believe how many people will grab a tube amplifier and just pine after a pair of Voice of the Theater speakers. It was never my thing. I mean, I always thought it was an okay PA speaker, but I never really cared for it for listening to it. But could you tell us a little bit about what you thought when you were walking into this, the studio? You maybe one of your dreams had just come true, and people were finally knowing who you were. What was it like walking in and seeing a studio like this, and what were your impressions of the studio?
You're talking about CBS?
I'm sorry, I said Columbia. Yes, CBS.
Well, that's the same, Columbia Broadcasting System. Yeah, well, this was so early in my career, I hadn't really figured everything out yet to a degree. I knew the way it's developed in the book, where I ended up doing a sort of a master's class down the road a bit. But I certainly knew how to make a record and produce a record and engineer a record. But what I hadn't learned yet was the importance of the technology in a studio and the acoustics. And as I found out right away from where I had come from, funny enough, the consoles at CBS Hollywood that they built, because back in the days, in the 60s, all the big companies built their own. RCA built their own consoles, CBS, everybody built their own stuff. And because there were no very minimal console manufacturers. And so they built their own. And whereas their tube consoles in the 60s were pretty darn good, made some great recordings, I couldn't believe how not good these transistor consoles sounded to me. And then I also found out pretty quickly that acoustics make a big difference. And their Studio A was a great big studio. That was their big studio for small orchestras or whatever. And that was the old Jack Benny radio studio. And in fact, the balcony of that was the tape library where they kept all the master tapes. But that studio had a pretty good sound, pretty okay sound, best by far in the building. The other two, B and C, were just full of fiberglass. They were just dead and didn't have life. And so as I came to learn in the very near future from there, that's how I started realizing what different things mattered, how different things mattered.
One of the things that you said in the book was that you guys had listened to the sound system there, and then you thought, well, I'm going to go listen to some speakers at some hi-fi shops, and that how surprised you were that many of the speakers that you listened to at the hi-fi shops were even out of phase, right?
Yeah. You used to be able to go into a hi-fi store and they'd have 8 different speakers set, and then here, and then you had buttons, and you could push the button and just hear what it was like in different speakers. And amazing, because inevitably no matter what the store was, you'd find one set of speakers were out of phase every time.
So during this time period, because you did mention this in the book, because I thought it was going to come to this resolve, but did you ever come up with anything that you thought was just, wow, this is really a great speaker? I can really appreciate, what these guys are doing.
No, the speaker of choice for recording studios in the 60s into the 70s was the Altec Concentric 604. And it was mostly housed in a utility cabinet that wasn't that big in terms of cubic volume. So this, excuse me, this was a speaker that didn't have what you would call an extended high end, and fell off on the low end, even in that box. In most studios, fell off pretty drastically after 80 cycles, 100 cycles. So, but that's what we used. That's what it was. And so it was interesting pretty early on that we started, we found, between Doug Sachs and I, we found some Mitsubishi speakers, bookshelf kind of speakers, that seemed to be much more accurate for what we wanted to hear. Accurate in the sense that what Doug and I would do in those early years is we would take a recording to one of these hi-fi stores and to see what it sounded like on a variety of speakers, because all speakers are going to play it back a little bit differently. And what makes a good mix or a good mastering of that mix is hopefully it's going to translate on a big variety of speakers. Obviously, it's not going to be right for on everyone, but get it to some kind of happy medium with the majority of what's out there, kind of thing. And these Mitsubishis, I ended up buying a pair and taking them to studios with me for a while because I liked, and Doug and I liked the mixes I did on those speakers. So, what
did you settle with when you opened the studio? When you opened your own studio, what was your monitor of choice at that point?
Well, the speakers in the mastering lab, they were built by Doug's brother, Sherwood, who was a very brilliant design engineer. In fact, he built the whole room. He built the power amp. He built everything in the room initially for the mastering lab. And it was his speakers, which was an Altec horn and an Electro Voice T350 tweeter, which I still love the sound of, and a pair of Utah woofers.
Yeah, well, they must have been pretty. They must have been pretty awesome, because the results you got from the studio were pretty incredible. Almost really everything that you mixed in that place. Do you miss it?
Do I miss it?
You miss the studio? Because you went, just so people know, Bill had his studio in Los Angeles, and now he's in Nashville. So that studio was disassembled, and I'm guessing you probably still have some of the parts, right?
Yeah, everything really. The thing is it was painful for sure, but and right decision or wrong, I'll never know. But here's the deal: that studio was certainly a big piece of me, my personality and everything that I had learned in the roughly 11 years before I started building it. So that I built it to have a room with a sound, the recording room. And I told the architect, I don't know how to get it. I'll know it when we get it. And if we don't get it first time, I'm going to tear it out and do it again, because that's the only reason I'm doing this. And I got very lucky with prayer and seat of the pants, and got 90% of it right out of the box. Called an acoustical engineer, and he told me how to fix the 10%. The room sounded incredible. We built the console from scratch. All of my favorite recording consoles that I worked on up until that point were all homemade consoles. And one of my mentors that kind of taught me all the basics, Toby Foster, he and I knew we could build something that sounded better than anything you could buy. And I think we did. And it had a lot of very unique things, including there were 2 line inputs. There's always a mic preamp input on a recording console, and then there's a line input for the tape machine, or now the Pro Tools return, whatever. But ours, we had 2 line inputs, because out in the room we had line level microphones that Sheffield built, and we had 24 tube mic preamps out in the room. So you could select on any average mic, other than the line levels, you could select whether you wanted to go into a tube preamp or a transistor preamp. And so, yeah, it was all very, very special. And I've sold some of it, but I had a huge collection of tube microphones, which I think to be the best that were ever made. And another unique thing was with tube microphones, they require a separate power supply. Transistor microphones can run on 48 volts that can run on the audio line called phantom power, but tube microphones have to have a power supply because they have tubes and they need high voltage. And Toby came up with a genius idea where all of our mic panels, there was a 3-pin cannon for a dynamic or a FET mic or a ribbon mic, and a 48 volt switch if it was a transistor, and then below it was a 5-pin cannon, and that was for the tube mics. And what he did was he matched the voltages in the connectors. Is this above most people's head? Probably.
No, go ahead. This is very fascinating.
Okay. He matched, whoever, I can't remember whether AKG or Neumann has the higher voltage, but that's what he ran the lower, he put resistors in on the ones that were lowers to match it. So that worked out really great. And then
so he had a preamp basically for it's a special preamp for the mic he was using, not just here's a high gain, here's a low gain, or here's high voltage and here's regular voltage. These were actually matched to the microphone.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
And then so it was an expensive studio. I'm very proud to say that it became one of the most popular and best sounding rooms in Los Angeles for 30 years. And then the record business started to collapse,
right?
And partially, and great part, because of home recording, and the
iPod. I mean, people were just doing different things, right?
Yeah. Well, but the thing, yeah, I mean, the thing that hurt the most, I think, of course, sales were sales, whatever. But what hurt the most was that people could record at home. Musicians, now all had, a studio at home, and a lot of home type studios. It didn't cost the fortune that my studio cost to build and put together, and it was still getting the job done. Did they have great acoustics? No. Did they have the kind of equipment I had? No. But it got the job done. And what finally pushed it over the edge for me was I was doing a Rod Stewart album, basically an unlimited budget. And I turned in, the bill got turned in for a couple of weeks' work, and the production coordinator in New York called and said, "What's with this bill?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, we don't pay this much money for a studio." I said, "Well, you're going to pay it on this one." That's what they agreed to, and that's what the studio is. And I knew right then, with that, here, even on a big artist where the money really, he's comfortable working there and he doesn't mind paying, extra money, fine. And I knew right then it was going to be terrible. So I ended up, making the decision to not bastardize the place, but to sell it. And I sold it. The studio next door was all mix rooms, and the owner had always said, "If you ever want to sell this, I want it." And I said, one day I called him up and said, "Okay, let's talk." So I got all the equipment, and I've been selling some of the mics because I don't, it was a huge collection. And then we decided, I had lost my love affair with Los Angeles sometime earlier, and we decided to make a change, and Nashville was the only place that made sense because they still have a music community, and it's been really great for me here. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I'll bet you have. Yeah, Nashville does have an incredible community, and I'm certainly glad to know that you're still working and actually active, and people are still calling you, and you're making new records and opening up new record labels, and I can't wait to see some of the stuff that you're going to be coming up with in the future.
I think I told you I got a couple that I'm just finishing working with the mastering of it right now. A couple of incredible albums, one on a new label, and both of them are just marvelous, great artists and great recordings.
Bill happened to send me a couple of recordings that he's been working on, and it's really neat that even as long as you've been doing this, you don't stop learning. Your recordings continue to get better and better. Some people just stop and went, "Look, I've got it down. This is my recipe." And that's as good as it's going to get. But you seem to continually improve your recordings year after year, recording after recording.
I don't know if it's year after year, but one thing for sure on the improvement side was, I still believe, I love the idea of live recording, of putting guys in a room. 75% of the records made today start with a click track. And the things
I would say more than that.
and things are overdubbed, in various, different things. One of my favorite stories is Lee Sklar, the famous bass player, the guy with the huge beard. He's played with everybody. About 10 years ago, when this was in full swing, he said, "Bill, when I was a young lad in my bedroom learning to play bass, I used to dream about being able to go in a room with a full band and play together. I've been very lucky to have realized that dream. I never realized that 40 years later, I'd be back in someone else's bedroom playing all by myself again." And that's the name of the game. But what happened about 10 years ago is that I had been mixing to a 1-bit system, putting my mixes on a 1-bit system. And Doug Sachs said, "Why don't you go back to PCM, but 24-192?" And so he had a design engineer, young guy that he had found brilliant, that did some work for him, named Josh Florian, JCF Audio. And I told Josh about that, and Josh came up, he said, "Look, I think there's a topology that people have given up on. If I do one specifically for 192, where it doesn't have to share filtering or anything, with this topology, I think it could be special." And I said, "Okay, go." And I commissioned him, and he did it. And with that, first time I mixed with it, Doug said, "This is really delicious." He said, "You should see how good it is. Go in your studio with, the highest resolution you can do is live musicians on the floor, and see what you get." And I was an analog dog. I hated the sound of digital when it came out.
Me too.
1644-1 with the filtering back then and the converters and whatnot just wasn't my cup of tea. And getting digital record, we went to digital recorders. I never bought one, in fact, for the studio, because there were competing versions that didn't work together, and somebody wanted the 3M and somebody else wanted the Ampex, and so on. So I didn't get one myself. But whenever I had one, if I was listening to through the glass and then through the electronics of the digital, I did not like the difference, what I was hearing. Not that analog, believe me, analog was not a perfect medium. It was even worse in the sense that whatever you got, if you put the tape away and didn't touch it and played it 30 days later, it didn't sound the same. Mostly that was the newer emulsions, newer from the end of the 70s, 80s on. It's interesting, you go back and try to play some of those tapes and they don't play. They have to be baked to play. But if you go back to the 60s and play the Brown stuff, they always play perfectly.
Is that right?
Anyway, so he said, "Go in and see what that does." So I took some friends that were basically out of Sergio Mendes's bands, Brazilian guys, and we went in and did a recording. And for the first time, when I listened to what live off the floor, through the glass, as we say, and through the throughput of the digital, I heard absolutely no artifacts, absolutely none. It was unbelievable to me. And so that's why I got started doing some of these live recordings, which is what you mentioned. I sent you a couple of that started Bravura Records, which I've still not gotten it off the ground. I've got 6 great albums, and I'm going to do a lot more. But I'm still looking for the financing to do it really right, to get worldwide distribution and do it really, really right on every level. But yeah, so that's old technology in terms of everything live at once, but yet with something that just sounds, I mean, it just sounds marvelous.
Well, that's an awesome story, and in fact, I've recounted that story quite a few times since you told it to me the first time. I always thought that was really interesting, especially for the guys that they talk theoretical digital, um, you know, different things like, oh well, your hi-fi can't even produce a dynamic range of 2496 or 192, and I always look at it from an engineering perspective, like the person that's recording this has now got all of this headroom that they never had before, a digital headroom that you could really take these recordings to new levels. It's not like you're always using the full 2496. In fact, rarely you do. But I find that the headroom is probably uh, uh, one of the better things that have come out of high resolution recording. We're getting some recordings these days from people that are not as good as you are, that actually are making some pretty good recordings because they do have that extra headroom.
Yeah. I have to tell you that on a spectrum analyzer of that Simon Phillips cut that I sent you, and you say you don't use it all. No, you don't. But two things. One, I think I can't remember. I think there's overtones on his cymbals that are above 30K. And of course, the first thing people say is that what difference does it make? The human ear doesn't do that, which is why we ended up with what we ended up with in the beginning. Then why is it that we've been making hardware manufacturers, speaker manufacturers, everyone has been trying to go outside the range of human hearing forever, and of course you can't hear 30K, but what you can hear, and especially the lower you go, let's take 1644.1, you can hear the bad effects of the filtering. That's what you hear. It's so you may not get the positive, but you definitely don't get the negative, and it just breathes better. It
I totally agree. I totally agree. And there's areas that I just don't think we know everything about high resolution yet. I think that there's artifacts in high resolution, or advantages in high resolution that you feel as much as you hear. I often describe it as millions and millions of tiny details that are now able to be produced, that any one or even 1,000 together doesn't mean that much, but you start combining these millions and millions of tiny details, and then all of a sudden, you do hear a big difference, particularly when you're used to listening to it. If once you listen to high, or at least once I listen to high resolution for a long period of time, if you take that away from me on good recordings, I notice a difference, and sometimes I can't put my finger on what that difference is. It's emotionally, I know that there's a difference. There's just something that I'm not feeling when I'm listening to the high res version.
Oh, absolutely. And Doug Sachs really was anti-digital for a long time, and there were a lot of you never hear about it anymore, but there were a lot of tests done, psychological kind of tests and whatnot, listening to 1644.1 compared to analog. Mm-hmm. And what can I say? I wish your company didn't exist, and every streaming company didn't exist. I wish people would sit at home with speakers and play the highest resolution they could get their hands on. But streaming it's not the future. It is the reality, and that's all there is. And so it's great that we have high resolution streaming. Please.
Yeah, it's I can just imagine someone who has had the experiences you've had and lived through the wonderful time period that you lived through. Because in my opinion, that's like the height of you like nailed the best part of the recording industry. You were there from the very, from the beginning with so many of these new technologies, and really rode it, and got very, very good at what you did. And then all of a sudden everything changes. It's got to be disheartening for anyone that's really, really involved in it right at that very second.
Yeah, well, what I had to do, you know, the hardest thing I think for me was watching people go from listening on speakers to listening on earbuds. That's that had to be the hardest. You know, when music, the Walkman was what started all that. Sony's Walkman, you know, was the idea of portable music, and it's, you know, music. You know, it's just it takes so much of the value of it. I mean, I get it. You know, it's great to be able to walk around with music. That's great, but you know, if they go home and actually listen on speakers, you know, so
I
yeah.
totally agree. I listen to headphones when I have to listen to headphones. I'll listen to headphones when I'm out. Like if I'm at the river, I may put on some headphones while I'm kayaking, or if I'm at the grocery store or something, I don't want to be hearing the lousy music that they're playing. I may use them now. But if I've ever got a choice, and I've got some really, really good headphones and a DCS Bartok just to my left that has got an amazing headphone preamp. But I never listen to headphones.
Oh no, yeah, headphones that's another thing. Headphones are great. I'm talking about earbuds. Those
earbuds, yeah,
things in your ear, you know, yeah.
But, even with headphones though, I want that tactile feel, right? You can't get, nothing's going to punch you in the chest when you're listening to headphones. They can sound good, but they can't give you that tactile feel. That's why the only time I listen to them is when I have to, or when I'm behind my drums and I need to protect my hearing. I'll put them on then. But most of the time, I would much rather listen to a pair of speakers, personally.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went into a friend of mine's hi-fi store in Los Angeles, a high-end hi-fi store, and he was playing. I didn't know what he was playing, but it sounded really good. And he said, I said, what are you playing? And he said, this is streaming. I went, what? That's before, you know, I didn't know that.
Oh, really?
You guys and Tidal and whatever, I didn't know it existed. You know, I'd heard about it, but I'd never heard it, is what I should say. And I was going, wow, it does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know something, I really had no idea that this was going to go. We're already at 5:18. I've just got like 4 stories, but I'm not gonna keep you any longer. But maybe you can come back again and we can do a fun show and just start talking about, you know, some specifics on some albums and just go through that. I think that would certainly be fun for our audience to hear. If you would like to do that, we'll certainly have you back again, Bill.
Okay, sure.
So right now, before we end, I want to remind everybody that that Bill has got a new book. That's mainly what this was on. This is on Chairman at the Board. I just finished reading the book last night. In fact, I was going to say this when Dan popped in, but my last email to Dan last night was, okay, it's 2:30 in the morning. I am not going to be in at 9 o'clock. I'm just totally cooked, because I knew at that point I still couldn't put it down, but it was just such a wonderful read. I encourage you all to go to Amazon and pick up a copy. The only problem with this book, at least that I found, was it just ended way too fast. So I was really happy when at the end of the book, I saw this little extra part that Bill had put in. It's going, well, you know, this really isn't the whole story. I've got so much more of this story. Just click on this link and put in a special code, and you can get the rest of the story. So after our meeting today, Bill, after our little get together, I'm going to go back and go to that special area.
Thank you. You know what's interesting is that somebody commented on social media that they were liking that more than the book.
So I don't doubt it. I mean, the book is so interesting, and I can't wait to see it, because you were telling me that you've actually got some, yeah, we talk about a album or a song or something, and you've actually got a link that they can actually hear it right then. That's what took me so long with the book. I could have plowed through this thing because it was just super interesting if I would have just, read a page and then turned a page. But I found it impossible to do this. But I enjoyed the way that I ingested the book. I ingested the book because I would read, and Bill would be talking about a Three Dog Night recording that he had made, or how he'd gotten a certain sound on Steve Gadd on the solo. It blew me away when you said that the guys from Steely Dan really didn't appreciate Steve Gadd when he first got there. I mean, who would have ever known? It just sounds like those guys go so much together. But I am looking forward to the addendum of the book, and reading a whole lot more. But it's a lot more fun if you just take your time. Don't be on a schedule. When Bill mentions a book, just go to Qobuz or whoever you're on, and listen to a little bit of it, because when Bill describes something and it actually happens and you can hear what he's talking about, it just makes the book come totally alive. If you're an engineer, this is required. This is required reading, because Bill talks so much about the heart and soul that goes into mixing and producing. It's not just a bunch of, turning a knob and raising a fader and fading somebody out. There is so much heart and soul that goes into a career like this. I read it, and throughout the whole book, I'm thinking, man, I wish I would have done that. Oh God, I wish I would have gone that direction. Oh, that sounds like such a fun story. But I've really appreciated reading yours, and certainly enjoyed it. So please buy the book, and I know you'll enjoy it. Any last minute words of advice or words of wisdom or whatever, Bill?
Music before sound. Music.
Yeah, and that is actually a quote in the book. So everybody enjoy it. Bill, thank you for joining us. And at this point, we're going to sign off and say goodbye. And thank you all for joining in. Thank you for all of the questions. And we will let you know the next time that we have Bill back on. Take care.
Thank you.